Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Arcania is an action RPG that came out in 2010, previously known as Gothic for Arcania, but not long after the game released, the publisher lost the license for the Gothic IP, so they had to rename the game to just Arcania. The Gothic IP went back to its original creator, the studio behind the Gothic trilogy, Piranha Bytes. Nowadays, Arcania sits in this weird limbo of existence and most people want to completely forget about it, especially the Gothic fans. But unfortunately, no matter how hard we try to ignore the pitiful existence of this game, it eventually comes back to haunt us whenever someone mentions it. Yo, I got some new games today, man! What we got? Ghost of Tsushima? Heard that's an awesome game. We got Skyrim. Wait, Skyrim? I don't remember buying Skyrim again. What the?
I'll figure it out.
Demon's Souls, awesome remake. And we got So the question you may ask, was it really that bad? Yes it was. Now look, I think I can be pretty objective about basically every game that I review on the channel, even when it comes to my most favorite titles. That's exactly the approach I had before I started playing Arcania again, after about 11 years. And it seems like my memory about this game was terrible, because you might remember me saying on a couple of occasions that Arcania wasn't that bad.
Sure, and my sheep can dance.
Don't get me wrong, I never thought Arcania was a good Gothic game. But I thought before that if you try to ignore the fact that it pretends to be a Gothic game, you could potentially have some fun while playing it. Well, I was completely wrong about that, probably because I forgot 99% of the game. I guess my brain wanted so hard to like this game, so it started playing tricks on me or something, I don't know. I almost never have a problem with finishing a game I want to review, but I was really struggling with Arcania. I wanted to quit on multiple occasions because I got really frustrated. Oh my god, really? Okay, whatever, just go back up. Wait, what? However, I somehow managed to finish the game and kill the end boss, and I just didn't have the strength to play and review the DLC Fall of the Setarith. You'll probably understand why after you watch the whole video. Arcania feels like it was developed by someone who has no experience in making these kinds of games, up to the point where the whole game feels like a parody of open world RPGs than anything else.
Yes, and yes.
It gets even worse if you try to compare it to previous Gothic games. Unfortunately, Spellbound Studio had no respect to the original material, and it doesn't take long to realize that while playing the game. Apart from all the major characters from previous Gothic games, Arcania literally has no resemblance to Gothic trilogy. That wouldn't be a crucial problem if Arcania was a good game in general, but it was far from that. The world is extremely basic, lifeless, and exploring the map feels like a chore. The story and dialogue are ridiculously bad.
You want to marry me?
Don't you?
Sure, it just comes so quickly.
She's pregnant. She won't say no.
What?
Comes so quickly.
The gameplay had some potential, but it's really mindless and it's almost completely broken. This review is a bit late because I was sick as a dog for about 5 days and I stayed in bed and played video games all day. Big surprise. Steel Rising got a new game plus, so I started playing that game again. I also started playing AC Origins and AC Valhalla as well, but anyway. I played this game on my PS5, but I also played it on the PC for a while, just for comparison's sake. It's actually a PS4 game, but it runs a lot better on PS5 with locked 60 FPS on 4K resolution. If you try to run the game on 4K on PC, you'll have problems with the UI because it won't scale properly. That's pretty much the biggest reason why I decided to play the rest of the game on my PS5, but anyway, let's go back to the beginning and start talking about this godforsaken game. Even though Arcania is not officially a Gothic game anymore, the story involves all the major characters from previous Gothic games. The premise of the story had some potential, I guess, but the horrible writing and ridiculously bad quest design overshadows that glimmer of potential. Once again, you play as a nameless hero, but it's not the same person from the original Gothic trilogy. The protagonist from previous games has become a king, and just like all previous kings in this universe, he's now called Robar, or Robar III to be more specific. His mind got corrupted in the meantime and he's not exactly himself anymore. Interestingly enough, you play the tutorial with him and it's a pretty bad and needlessly long tutorial. When I checked the recording, it's actually only around 8 minutes, but it felt a lot longer than that. I made a crucial mistake and selected the hardest difficulty, which apparently inflates the health pool of all NPCs, so it took some serious button mashing to go through this section. And for some reason the hardest difficulty is called Gothic. Lol. For comparison's sake, only Gothic 3 had the option to choose the difficulty, previous Gothic games had a fixed difficulty level. Anyway, playing with the original nameless hero in the tutorial is a cool idea because he's trying to fight his inner demons that corrupted his mind. And it's a bit nostalgic because you get to control a well-known character from previous Gothic games. But all you're doing is killing a lot of NPCs while being completely immune to all of their attacks. The funniest thing about this tutorial are the combat features which the game is trying to teach you. And it's funny because this is pretty much it for the rest of the game. The whole progression system is almost completely irrelevant, but we'll get to that soon enough. You're just spamming the attack button because you can't die and it's way too long for no apparent reason. When that's done, the game begins in a small village where you take the control of a new protagonist. The new protagonist is just known as the Shepherd. And apparently the tutorial section was just Shepard's nightmare. Right off the bat you're introduced to some very bad dialogue and a couple of uninteresting characters.
You told Auric about us?
No, he saw us and we quarreled about it.
At first, your main quest is related to Ivy. Ivy is a girl you like and you're trying to get approval from her father. Speaking of her father, I want you to take a closer look at his face because this guy is literally everywhere. Trust me, I'm not over-exaggerating if I say that every third character you're going to talk with looks like this motherfucker. I'm not even talking about some side characters and unimportant NPCs you're going to see in populated places, who also have this face. 80% of important story NPCs look like this. At first it was kinda funny, but as you progress further it gets frustrating and sad. There is no way in hell that you can even begin to take the story seriously when almost all important NPCs have this stupid face. But let's leave this discussion for the visual section. You have to do a couple of very simple fetch quests so you can get the approval from Gromar. And if you hope that quests will get more interesting than this, you'll be very disappointed. The game falls flat to its face even when it tries to give you a bit more context behind the quest, because the writing is just awful.
Does anything go right?
Anyway, you can meet a couple of more characters in the village. One of them is the orc called Orak, and I was immediately disappointed with Spellbound's idea of orcs. The orcs in this game are just dumb as a bag of rocks, to put it lightly.
Auroch told nothing. Auroch likes the young lady.
Now, you might make an argument that this is similar to Gothic 1 and 2, because orcs in those games were pretty bad at communicating as well. But trust me, orcs in this game are completely mindless.
Open the gate.
Gate stays closed. Hog inside, you outside. I'm in the middle.
It makes you wonder how the hell they managed to conquer the Midlands in Gothic 3. And speaking of Gothic 3, orcs were simply amazing in that game. They were easily one of the best things about the whole game. Their dialogue and visuals were top-notch, and surprisingly they had some amazing voice acting as well.
What goods are you waiting for?
3 large packages with my name on them. Big, sturdy wooden crates.
I'll make the necessary arrangements to put a stop to it. Good work. Carry on.
Then how the hell we went from this to this?
Auroch likes the young lady.
There were some lazy attempts to make the orcs in Arcania kinda similar to Gothic 3, but it's not very good, to put it lightly. Luckily, the orcs are just side characters in this game because the main quest is almost completely unrelated to them. And speaking of the main quest, you get to meet Diego quite early in the game. This is one of the quests you have to do for Gromar because he thinks Diego is a bandit, so you have to get rid of him. However, you learn that Diego is actually your friend, just like in previous Gothic games. Yeah, just like that, the new protagonist is a good friend not only with Diego, but pretty much with all major characters from previous Gothic games. Well, not exactly, but you're going to meet all of them at one point, but we'll get to that. In order to complete Gromar's quest, you'll have to take Diego's weapon, but Diego won't just give it to you, of course, you'll have to beat him in a duel. This is like another tutorial, but even more pointless because the game tries to teach you how to block by being completely stationary and holding a button. Trust me, there is not a single reason you want to use this mechanic in the game, but we'll talk about that in the gameplay section. Diego then gives you a quest to kill some goblins, and after that is done, he finally gives you the weapon. Oh, and by the way, check out this amazing dialogue with Diego by the waterfall with some amazing audio mixing. Once you return to Gromar, he of course gives you another pointless quest to kill some deer outside of the village. I guess this is just another tutorial where you get to learn how to use a bow. After that's done, Gromar finally gives you his blessing for marrying Ivy, but now you have to get the bangle for the wedding. But even though Arcania has mindless kill this, collect that quests, the game just can't give you a straightforward quest. Because on top of those mindless quests, the game has to attach a couple of more identical quests where you have to collect something for another NPC before you can get a thing for the original quest giver. And this can be an extremely frustrating process even when the game is trying to be slick and funny about it.
We orcs have a saying. You eat my lice, and I eat yours.
In this specific case, the previously mentioned orc wants some mushrooms before he agrees to sell you the material you need for the bangle. After all of that nonsense is done, Ivy tells you she wants to leave the village and explore the world before she gives birth to your child. Oh yeah, Ivy's pregnant by the way.
Come so quickly.
Then you have to talk with Diego because he's an expert in traveling, I guess, and he gives you yet another test. You have to visit a certain witch called Lyrica on the other side of the island, which is apparently really dangerous. Surprise, surprise, the witch also gives you a test of skill, but this time around it's related to magic. You have to use these scrolls on the bugs when they get defensive in order to kill them. That's pretty much it. If you don't do this, they regenerate health and they are completely immune to any attacks whilst in this state. You would think the game is trying to teach you how to fight similar enemies in the game, which would be perfectly fine if it was actually true. But in reality, this is the first and the last time you have to use this tactic to defeat an enemy in this game. Every single enemy you fight after this can be killed by just using a single button. Oh yeah, by the way, Lyrica has some amazing voice acting.
Might be, might not be. My nose is telling me. Might be.
She claims to see something very powerful in you, so that's the reason for testing you, I guess. Here comes the part that got me laughing out loud. Once you kill the last enemy in the cave, the game just cuts to the next scene with Diego. There was supposed to be a cutscene in between, where you get to see your village getting destroyed by King Srobar army, but the cutscenes are completely broken in this game. At least on the PS4 version. You just have to pretend that this shit happened, I guess. At first, I wanted to check if my PC version had the same problem, but to be completely honest with you, I just couldn't play through the beginning section of the game again. Even in the very end of the game, the cutscene is completely missing, and I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be there. The DLC Fall of Setharith automatically starts after you defeat the end boss, and that's it. It's really bad and careless. Anyway, this is where the game opens up. Well, kinda. The exploration in Arcania is very systematic. You have to do some specific story quests in order to unlock different chunks of the map. You could make an argument that this is not exactly an open world game because of this. Come to think of it, this design choice is not fundamentally bad. The biggest reason why it feels bad in Arcania is because the world is mind-numbingly boring, but more about that in the gameplay section. So the whole main story turns into a revenge quest from this point on. Diego tells you about this magical forge in the mountains that the paladins of King Robar are trying to find. Supposedly, this forge can make you some crazy strong weapons, and your quest is to gain the access to the forge before them. Because that makes a lot of sense, right? The Shepherd is obviously way more capable than the full-blown paladin army of the king. I don't see a problem here, thanks Diego. Look, I'm not trying to say that previous Gothic games had an amazing main story, because they didn't, let's face it. And you know I say that as a huge fan of Gothic series, the main story was never the strongest aspect of those games. Some people might disagree, and that's completely fine, but the main story in Arcania is just ridiculously bad. There are some games which are bad but fun and unintentionally hilarious, like Two Worlds 1.
And why should I not go back there, pray?
And I'm sure you can think of at least a couple of more similar games, but unfortunately, Arcania is just a bad game with almost no fun factor at all. But we need to continue. Whoop-de-fuck-do.
You? Ha! You ain't got the muscle.
The game always has a couple of side quests that you can find in each area, so you don't exactly only have to follow the main quest. I really try to give a fair chance to side quests, like I always do in every RPG that I review, but after a while I just gave up. I mean, what you can expect from side quests when the main story is a collection of mindless kill this and collect that quests. So yeah, I decided to focus on the main story quests. I will try my best to sum it up for you because 99% of the main story progression is locked behind a couple of local area quests you have to do in order to unlock the next area you have to visit. Technically, there are only a couple of sections in the game where you get the actual information about the main quest. Just remember, your main goal is to find the magical forge, so you go around various places on the map to try and get some info about it. This is probably one of the cheapest ways you can write the main story for your game. You're basically doing a bunch of side quests for the zone you're currently in until you can unlock the next zone. When that happens, you usually get to ask a couple of questions about your main objective and then you get some totally unrelated side quests you have to do before you can unlock the next area. So even though I said I try to focus on the main story quest in particular, it's technically not possible to do so. The only slightly redeeming factor when it comes to the main story, and even that's just a nostalgia bait, is meeting your friends from previous Gothic games. Just by pure coincidence, Shepard meets all Robert's friends and they kinda become his friends as well, because of course they do. That's not really bad per se, but besides the unique character models of these NPCs, they have nothing interesting to say or any character developments. They just pop out of nowhere every now and then and they give you some stupid quests you have to do. To be fair, these characters look pretty good, and it seems like they tried really hard to keep the original visual style from previous Gothic games. Unfortunately, that's where all the positive stuff ends. These familiar faces are not an exception when it comes to some horrific dialogue lines.
What's this mystery?
Ah, a mysterious mystery, my friend.
Friend? Have we met before?
All people are my friends, my friend. Until they prove me wrong.
Right, I think I got it.
On more than a couple of occasions, I completely forgot the reason for doing some of these quests, which were related to the main story. Like I said, these quests usually don't have anything to do with your main goal, their objectives are all over the place. Long story short, you eventually get your revenge by killing the dude who was responsible for slaughtering everyone in your village. You also meet Robar and try to help him with a curse. But when I got up to that point, I stopped paying attention to the story almost completely because I just couldn't take it anymore. You get to do some very obnoxious quests in the city near the end of the game, and what makes them even worse compared to all the other quests in the game is the city itself. This map is designed like a fucking maze and you have to run back and forth in order to complete a couple of quests. You'll find a lot of blocked paths that just serve to annoy the shit out of you because they don't make a lot of sense. They only exist to artificially extend the main quest line because you would be able to finish this quest a lot faster if you didn't have to go around the whole fucking map to reach a certain area. Anyway, it turns out that some witch called Zeisha is the main antagonist and you get to fight her at the end. But before that, you get to meet a very familiar face, Zardas.
I'm sure you have some questions.
Remember when I said how it feels pointless to meet all the major characters from previous Gothic games? Well, the game gives you even less reasons to meet Zardas, especially so late in the game, but you do. As for the ending itself, let's just put it this way. If the game studio doesn't care enough to fix the story cutscenes, why should I care about the story in general? The reason why I'm mentioning this again is the ending cutscene, which doesn't exist. You kill the end boss after a very boring fight and you immediately start the DLC. Just like near the beginning of the game where you don't get to see a cutscene when your village gets destroyed. Even if you try to ignore the fact that cutscenes are completely broken, the story itself is terribly written. Sloppy, careless, and almost no respect for the original material. But hey, maybe the gameplay is not so bad, right? Yeah, let's talk about it, finally. I briefly touched upon the world design before, so let's start with that. The world keeps opening up as you progress through the main story quest, so it's not exactly a traditional open world. Like I said before, I'm not a big fan of this design, but it's not fundamentally bad. There are multiple reasons why it feels so bad in Arcania. The world itself feels very basic, lifeless, and not to mention all the glitches. No, but seriously, as soon as you even try to go off a beaten path a little bit, or god forbid jump on something, the game just doesn't know how to react. You will either slide for a while and die at the end of the animation, or the game just automatically turns your character back. It feels extremely janky. To make things even worse, there are a bunch of areas that look explorable but they're actually not, for reasons I mentioned above. Arcania tries to mimic some features from previous Gothic games, but with not much success. NPCs will go to sleep at night, but they don't do much in general during the day, so it's not exactly a full-blown day and night schedule, not even close actually. The game just fails to create a good atmosphere, which will potentially be very immersive. That was one of the key aspects of all Gothic games, and if they manage to do it properly, I think I will be much more forgiving towards this game. Speaking of immersion or the lack of it, you can just rob everyone and they just won't care. The game has a bunch of interactable objects, but they don't serve any purpose. The animation starts playing, but that's it. To be fair, previous Gothic games had some similar ideas, but the majority of interactable objects had an actual gameplay purpose. But like I said, Arcania only plays the animation and that's it. On a more positive note, the world map has a nice amount of verticality, it's not flat by any means. If you're watching my other reviews, you know I love to explore vertical open worlds in RPGs. It's a big plus in my book, but when a game has so many problems with the general design, the verticality doesn't mean that much in the grand scheme of things.
Does anything go right?
The dungeons are a huge part of Arcania's exploration. For the most part, all of them feel the same, with identical visual design, which is very bland by the way. These dungeons are very bright and the lack of shadows is really off-putting. Some of them are designed with convenient shortcuts that take you to the beginning of the dungeon, while others are just very linear. To be fair, the game has a couple of good looking dungeons, but the way they are designed is still pretty bad. You usually have to find a key somewhere in the dungeon so you can open a locked door and progress further. Why this demon has a key for the door you have to open? Your guess is good as mine. Theoretically, if the world was actually fun to explore, I would say Arcania has a good balance between exploring open areas and dungeons. Yeah, I'm trying so hard to find something positive to say about this damn game. Speaking of that, I must admit, it was kinda fun to loot stuff in the game. Even though Arcania's itemization system has no similarities to Gothic games, finding armor pieces and weapons was fun for a while. The thing is, most of the stats you see on these armor pieces don't really matter. For example, stamina is completely broken because it doesn't limit your movement, attacks, or anything significant at all. So you'll be sitting there and wondering, why does it even exist? I guess you'll do less damage with attacks when it's completely depleted, but it's not really a big deal. When it comes to armor sets, you can only get them by completing specific main quests. You'll always have a choice between 3 different armors, which are fit for 3 different playstyles. I really don't like this way of obtaining new armors in the game, even though it does have some resemblance to Gothic games. It makes obtaining new armor pieces more meaningful because you can only get them after a certain point. I don't have much to say about crafting, it's not really that bad. You can find different recipes throughout the game and you'll need the materials in order to craft the item. You just open up your menu and you can start crafting. I mean, the game already has crafting animations when you're at the forge, so they could easily connect those two things. But they didn't. It just goes to show you how this studio didn't understand some of the key aspects of Gothic game design. But what about the combat? Well, I'm glad you asked. If you like spamming one button and killing everything, you're going to love the melee combat in Arcania. If it's not obvious already, I went for a melee build in this playthrough, although calling it a build is a huge exaggeration. That's because the progression system in Arcania is almost completely broken, but we'll talk about that soon enough. When you start the game, you only get a quick attack, dodge, and the blocking ability, which is completely useless. The controls are not terrible, but some things just don't make a lot of sense, like the mentioned blocking ability. Check this out, you can only block while holding a button and being completely stationary. As soon as you move from the blocking stance, Shepard will do a dodge roll. But even if the controls for blocking were better, there is absolutely no reason to try and use this ability, ever. Most enemy types in the game overuse the power attack and it's a bad idea to try and block it. Stronger enemies will usually knock you out with this move if you're close to them, even if you try to block. So the best tactic is to spam the quick attack and use the dodge button to move out of the way when needed. It seems like every single attack has a very high chance to stagger the enemy, so that's why it only makes sense to spam the button. Like I said, some enemies, especially in the early game, will overuse the power attack. You can only interrupt this attack by using your power attack. When you learn the power attack, you can basically kill all enemies by using it over and over again and just moving a bit to avoid attacks. That looks something like this. This seems to be the meta for melee combat because there wasn't a single enemy in the game that I couldn't easily kill like this. And that pretty much describes 99% of melee combat in the game. The enemy AI is brain dead, so they will only use these 2 melee attacks throughout the whole freaking game. Mage and ranger NPCs will try to poke you from a distance with the most basic spells and attacks. All of your melee attacks have a huge AoE hitbox, so you're able to hit almost everything in front of you. Now look, I know that Gothic games never had an amazing combat system, especially when it comes to Gothic 3. But compared to Arcania, they have a much deeper and meaningful combat with way superior RPG progression system. Granted, the combat mechanics in Gothic games were always janky and pretty rough, but if you're willing to learn how they actually work, it was more than functional. But looks can be deceiving. Arcania has some decent animations, which might lead you to believe that combat is way better than it actually is. The combat in Arcania had the potential to be really decent, not only because of the solid animations. There is a combo system that allows you to perform a couple of hits in a row if your timing is right. You might think this is reminiscent of Gothic 1 and 2, but compared to those games, the combo system in Arcania is almost completely irrelevant. You need to watch out for the glowing effect and then press the button again for the successful combo. You can extend the length of the combo by investing points into corresponding skill. For 90% of the game you're going to fight multiple enemies at once, and trying to focus on your combo just doesn't make a lot of sense in these situations, because you're much more likely to get hit. You'll get much better results by just spamming the button or using a power attack over and over again. What would make this combat system a lot better are different enemy types that require you to think a bit about your attacks. If the stamina was actually a functional limiting factor, that would also make it a little bit better, I guess. But all of that is just what if. In reality, there are only 2 different enemies in the entire game which have some unique abilities, and stamina doesn't matter at all. Not 2 different enemy types, I'm talking about 2 different NPCs. The bugs in the cave from the beginning that require you to use the spell, and the end boss. All other enemies you're going to fight can be easily beaten by spamming the attack button. The end boss and his bugs are the only enemy where you have to take a slightly different approach when fighting them in melee range. Since the stamina doesn't matter a lot, you can abuse the power attack as much as you want. It seems like you're doing less damage if your stamina is low, but you still have a 100% chance to stagger the enemy. The animation for fully charging this attack is pretty long, but the thing is, you don't even have to wait for the animation to end. You can release the button as soon as you start holding it, and the damage you deal will be very similar to the fully charged power attack. It's almost like nothing truly matters when it comes to 80% of combat mechanics in this game. The hitboxes can be really wonky as well. The sense of impact is actually quite decent. It's not amazing by any means, but the weapons feel like they have some actual weight behind them, and sound effects are good enough. When it comes to other playstyles, we have ranged attacks with the bow and crossbow and some magic spells you can learn. You can also find a couple of different magic runes which have some unique abilities. The speed rune is the only thing I used because it's great for the movement, obviously. Using the bow and magic feels a lot better compared to the melee playstyles, but this is not fixing all the issues we mentioned before, far from it actually. The bow has 3 dots which will indicate the amount of damage you can do. There are also headshots which deal more damage, but I didn't really use this mechanic a lot. I was using the bow quite a bit in the early game and I just used the lock-on mechanic every time. Aiming the bow manually is possible, but it's just a huge waste of time in this game. It can be a pain in the ass to keep your distance with the bow, especially because enemies can teleport all over the place. So playing as a pure archer is not exactly a good option. Remember when I mentioned that terrain in the game can be extremely glitchy? Well, that's not only the case for your character, the enemy will have some issues in fights as well. If they come across even the smallest obstacle on the ground, there is a high possibility they will get stuck. So they start teleporting back and forth, it's really bad. Anyway, I played the game as a mage when it first came out, and it was a lot better experience compared to my recent melee playthrough. But all of these playstyles suffer from the extremely basic and almost completely broken progression system. This quote-unquote system has a very linear progression. Each time you level up, you get 3 points to invest. No matter where you decide to invest your points, you will get some basic stat increases like health and stamina. The big notes you see are supposed to be some special abilities you get to learn, but as you might imagine, they're not very useful, especially when it comes to melee skills. Apart from unlocking the power attack, I never got the feeling like my character is actually progressing. I don't even have to explain why that's really bad, especially in an RPG. Only time when I felt my character is actually getting a bit stronger is when I get a new weapon that does more damage. So the game is not exactly devoid of any progression, but it's something very close to that. Most melee abilities you can get are related to the combo, and we already talked about that. To put it this way, if you're crazy enough to play this game, I highly advise you to go for a mage playstyle, and you might even have some fun every now and then. Yeah, fun, imagine that. To make things a lot worse, the balancing of the game is all over the place. Like I said before, the game has a couple of different difficulty settings. I'm the type of a person who likes to play all games on the highest difficulty just because I really enjoy the challenge. And I have some weird gamer ego, which I'm not afraid to admit. So I started Arcania on the highest difficulty setting called Gothic for some reason. The game was not actually hard at all on this difficulty in the early and the mid game. I assume the NPCs only have inflated health pools and that's pretty much it. Don't expect extra mechanics and moves from NPCs or more aggressive behavior or anything similar to that. The reason why I decided to bring the difficulty down all the way to easy is the piss poor damage I started doing. In these kinds of situations in other RPGs, you would think you need to upgrade your weapon somehow or level up and get stronger.
Ha! You ain't got the muscle.
But I just got a brand new sword that boosted my damage quite a bit, and I only invested points into melee abilities. That was still not enough to start doing some decent damage, it's ridiculous. Then I tried to fight like Spellbound intended, I guess, by paying attention to the combo system. To no one's surprise, that turned out to be even worse, even though I started doing a bit more damage, to be honest. But like I said before, you're just opening yourself for potential damage by trying to execute combos in most situations. The animation lock is just way too long. And what do you know, the game actually has another enemy type with the same ability like those bugs we mentioned before. The reason why I didn't mention this enemy type before is because you can skip most of these fights by just running. I skipped a lot of fights like this, especially near the end of the game. You would have to be insane to fight everything that you come across in this game. Arcania uses this as a cheap tactic to prolong the game, especially in the last city where you're constantly running back and forth. If I didn't drop the difficulty to easy, I think I would quit the game a lot sooner and this review wouldn't be possible. The damage you deal is just ridiculously low, even on easy difficulty against some enemies. It's like Spellbound knew that the best way to beat these enemies is by spamming the button, so they made sure to inflate their health pools. It's sad because the combat had the potential to be really fun, but unfortunately it's very mindless and it lacks the meaningful RPG progression system. When it comes to visuals, the game looks pretty decent in general for this day and age, even though it does have some annoying problems. First of all, the game has something I never seen before. If you play the game on PC, you'll have the option to select different visual styles, European or American. What? It turns out that this option changes the color palette of the game. So if you select European, the color palette is more grayish with noticeably desaturated colors in general. But if you select American, you'll get more vibrant colors. I have no idea why this is even a thing, but there you go. I mean, I'm not complaining about extra visual options, but naming them as American and European is just weird. The console version has vibrant colors by default, and you won't find this option in the menu. When it comes to some specific visual details, the distant terrain is the first thing that comes to my mind. It's pretty damn good for a 2010 game, even though the PS4 version has some visual artifacts on top of the screen. And speaking of that, the PS4 version also has some very aggressive pop-in, but maybe not in a traditional manner. Check out the length of those trees, they get bigger when you come closer, it's really off-putting. I'm going to assume that PC version doesn't have these issues, but I can't actually confirm that. The world looks decent for the most part and some of the locations look pretty interesting. I think Tushu is the most interesting location you're going to visit, well, at least visually. Navigating through these populated places feels pretty bad in general. My biggest problem with the visual design in general is the open areas. All of them look extremely generic and lifeless. Most of these open areas are designed around the quest you have to solve, and other than that, there is literally nothing interesting to see while exploring them. We already touched upon the character models, but let's talk a little bit more about it. If we try to ignore the fact that you're going to meet the same guy over and over again, the character models are not that bad for a 2010 game. The faces have a decent amount of detail and the lip syncing is not terrible. There is this very annoying visual glitch, I guess, when it comes to some character models. The hair has a very noticeable outline effect that looks really bad. But yeah man, I just have to mention this guy again because he ruined the whole game for me. He's fucking everywhere. Most armor pieces in the game have a pretty cool and unique visual design. If I had to try really hard to find my most favorite thing about the game, I guess that would be it. The game does have a day and night cycle, which changes the mood a little bit, but it's not a huge difference because the lighting in the game is not all that great. Every once in a while it's going to start raining, and that's pretty much the biggest atmosphere shift which the game can create. Overall, the graphics are not amazing by any means, but it's not the worst thing about the game. I would be ready to forgive all the issues with the visuals if the game was actually good. The sound design in Arcania is a mixed bag. First of all, there are sections in the game where music doesn't even play at all for some reason. And this happens right from the beginning. I had to check the music options in the menu, but it was fine, the music just didn't play. Even when it does, you're not going to remember any of these tracks, because they're really generic. This is really disappointing because Gothic games always had an amazing soundtrack. To be fair, the main theme of the game is pretty decent, but that's pretty much it. On the other side, sound effects are quite decent. Not amazing by any means, but they are more than serviceable. Although I do feel like something is missing here. Shepard doesn't have any reaction when he gets hit or when he dies in combat, it's kinda weird. I really like the sound effect when Shepard is moving around, there is something satisfying about it. It makes you feel like your character has some actual weight. Same goes for most of the sound effects in combat. This is another reason why I said that combat had the potential to be really decent. The voice acting ranges from decent to pretty bad.
Isn't there any other way to get you out of this cell?
Except for Gorn's way. I can't think of one. But if you can, why not?
I'll get you your limbic.
Oh, really? That's wonderful. Well then, I can put my pickaxe down and wait till you get back.
Every now and then you're going to hear some solid voice acting, but for the most part it's average at best. It didn't really bother me a lot, to be honest, although the bad dialogue made it a lot worse.
Yes, and yes.
Arcania will always be a black sheep in the Gothic series, even though it's technically not a Gothic game anymore. Sure, the studio that developed the game deserves some blame, but if you ask me, the main culprit was definitely the publisher, Joe Wood. This was their second chance to make something good out of Gothic's IP, and they completely failed. Their first attempt was with Gothic 3 Forsaken Gods expansion, which was arguably a lot worse than Arcania, but that's a topic for another video. To put it this way, at its best, Arcania is a mediocre action-adventure, and at its worst, it's a bad RPG that has very little to do with the original Gothic series. If you're not a die-hard fan of Gothic games, you might even have some fun with this game, but I'm not really sure about that either. And if it's not obvious already, I wouldn't recommend playing this game at all. But if you're really bored and you wanna try it out for some reason, you can get it on GOG with my link and support the channel. And if you like these kinds of videos, pressing the thumbs up button and subscribing to the channel would be wonderful. And if you wanna go a step further, you can become a Patreon or a YouTube member. Get your name immortalized on the end credits and be the first one who finds out about my future projects. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.